It is one of the peculiar tragedies of our age that the woman who taught a generation of children about the importance of choosing love over fear, tolerance over prejudice, and standing up for the marginalized against their oppressors, has herself become consumed by exactly the kind of moral panic she once wrote against. J.K. Rowling, having given us Harry Potter's struggle against those obsessed with blood purity, now spends her days obsessing over chromosomal purity with the fervor of a Victorian eugenicist who's just discovered Twitter. The transformation has been as complete as it has been pathetic. Here is one of the wealthiest women in Britain, someone who could spend her remaining years doing literally anything, fighting poverty, promoting literacy, enjoying her castle in Scotland, who has instead chosen to become a full-time opponent of trans people's right to exist in public life. She tweets about it constantly, writes essays about it compulsively, and has made it the central organizing principle of her public persona. One imagines her waking each morning and immediately checking whether any trans person has dared to use a bathroom, play a sport, or simply exist without her permission. What makes this particularly grotesque is that Rowling presents herself as a feminist defending women's rights, when what she's actually doing is recycling the same arguments that were used against feminists for centuries. Biology is destiny, she cries, apparently forgetting that this was exactly what men said to keep women out of universities, voting booths, and professions. Sex is real, she insists, as if anyone had claimed otherwise, as if acknowledging the existence of trans people somehow negates the existence of biological sex, as if complexity and nuance were threats to reality rather than aspects of it. The intellectual poverty of her position is matched only by the confidence with which she presents it. She claims to have researched the issue extensively, but her research seems to consist entirely of reading the work of other anti-trans activists, citing discredited studies, and misrepresenting data with the shamelessness of an anti-vaccine campaigner. She presents herself as brave for expressing views that are shared by most of the British media establishment, as persecuted while using her massive platform to persecute others, as silenced while never shutting up. Consider her novel written under the pseudonym Robert Galbraith, itself a name shared with the pioneer of gay conversion therapy, which she claims was coincidental. The book features a serial killer who dresses as a woman to kill women, a trope so worn and harmful that it would embarrass a 1970s exploitation filmmaker. This is the woman who created Hermione Granger, now writing plots that could have been conceived by someone whose entire understanding of gender comes from watching Psycho and thinking it was a documentary. But it's the obsessive nature of her campaign that truly reveals its pathological character. She cannot let it go, cannot move on, cannot stop herself from inserting anti-trans rhetoric into every conversation, every essay, every public statement. When children write to thank her for Harry Potter, she probably wonders if they're really the gender they claim to be. When she sees a tall woman on the street, one suspects she mentally demands to see their birth certificate. She has become the very thing her books warned against, someone so consumed by fear of the other that she's lost sight of our common humanity. The comparison to her own creation, Voldemort, is almost too obvious, but it bears making. Here is someone who has become so obsessed with purity, so convinced of the threat posed by those she considers impure, that she's willing to ally herself with anyone who shares her obsession, regardless of their other views. She finds herself in coalition with the religious right, with actual fascists, with people who would strip away every feminist gain of the last century if given the chance. But they hate trans people, and for Rowling, that's apparently enough to make them allies. Her gender-critical movement, what a masterpiece of Orwellian terminology that is, like calling racism race realism, or homophobia sexuality criticism, presents itself as defending women while actually undermining everything feminism has fought for. They demand genetic testing for athletes, genital inspections for bathroom use, the policing of women's appearances and bodies in ways that would make the Taliban jealous. In the name of protecting women, they've created a surveillance state for gender, where any woman who doesn't perform femininity correctly becomes suspect. The real women being harmed by this obsession are, of course, ignored. Trans women facing violence and discrimination, cis women harassed in bathrooms for not looking feminine enough, young people driven to suicide by the kind of rhetoric Rowling promotes. None of them matter in her calculus. She's like someone so afraid of sharks that she's willing to drain the ocean, never mind who drowns in the process. What's particularly galling is her appropriation of genuine feminist concerns as cover for her bigotry. She speaks of protecting sex-based rights while attacking some of the most vulnerable women in society. She claims to be defending lesbian spaces while ignoring the many lesbians who support trans rights and the long history of solidarity between trans and lesbian communities. She presents herself as protecting children while contributing to a climate that makes trans youth feel their very existence is up for debate. The tragedy is that Rowling could have been a powerful voice for inclusion, for understanding, for the kind of love and acceptance her books supposedly championed. Instead, she's chosen to become the living embodiment of Dolores Umbridge, insisting that her cruelty is actually kindness, that her bigotry is actually feminism, that her obsession is actually principle. She sits in her castle, surrounded by her billions, convinced that she's the victim while using her massive platform to punch down at people who just want to live their lives. One thinks of her Harry Potter books now with a kind of melancholy. All those themes about accepting difference, about not judging people for how they were born, about the danger of obsessing over blood purity. Did she never understand her own work? Was it all just accidental profundity from someone who didn't grasp the implications of her own metaphors? How can the woman who wrote "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities," now insist that biology is destiny and chromosomes determine everything? The psychological explanation seems obvious. Here is someone who built her identity on being a feminist hero, a champion of the oppressed, a beloved author who changed the world. Faced with criticism from a younger generation who don't see her as progressive but as reactionary, she's doubled down rather than reflected, entrenched rather than evolved. Like many people who were progressive for their time, she's decided that progress should have stopped when she was comfortable with it. But psychological explanations don't excuse moral failures. Plenty of people Rowling's age have managed to understand that trans people are human beings, deserving of dignity and respect. Plenty of feminists have recognized that trans rights and women's rights are not in opposition, but in alliance against the same patriarchal structures. Plenty of authors have managed to age without becoming exactly the kind of person their younger selves would have despised. The saddest part is watching her former fans, particularly trans youth who found comfort in her books, grapple with the betrayal. Harry Potter meant something to them, the idea that being different wasn't wrong, that found families could be as real as biological ones, that love could triumph over hate. To see the author of those ideas now spreading hate, now insisting that biological families are the only real ones, now making different people feel wrong for existing, it's a betrayal that goes beyond mere disappointment. What Rowling represents is the liberal who was never really liberal, the feminist who was never really feminist, the progressive who was only progressive until progress threatened their comfort. She's the embodiment of that species of British liberal who thinks they're enlightened because they don't use racial slurs in public, but who clutch their pearls at any actual change to the social order. She'll write about fighting fascism in her fiction while enabling it in reality, champion the underdog in her stories while kicking actual underdogs in life. The fixation has consumed her. She could be remembered as the woman who got a generation of children reading, who created a modern mythology, who went from welfare to wealth through the power of imagination. Instead, she seems determined to be remembered as the billionaire who couldn't stop tweeting about other people's genitals, the children's author who made children feel unsafe, the feminist who betrayed feminism for the approval of misogynists. History will not be kind to her, and she seems to know it, which only makes her double down harder. Like all zealots, she's convinced that future generations will vindicate her, that she'll be seen as a brave truth-teller who stood against a mass delusion. But history shows us where this kind of obsession leads, what happens to those who become consumed by their fear of others, who mistake their prejudice for principle. In the end, J.K. Rowling has become a cautionary tale about what happens when someone mistakes their own fears for philosophy, their own disgust for feminism, their own prejudice for courage. She's joined that long line of formerly respected figures who destroyed their legacies in pursuit of their obsessions, who chose to be remembered for their hatreds rather than their creations. The woman who gave us happiness can be found even in the darkest of times if one only remembers to turn on the light, has chosen to spend her time trying to turn off the lights for others. The irony would be delicious if it weren't so tragic. The author who taught children to question authority now demands they accept her authority. The creator who celebrated difference now polices it. The writer who gave us Dumbledore's army has joined Voldemort's ranks, and she's too lost in her own obsession to see it.